Hey everybody, this is David Hulegaard, and you're listening to the Hulegaard Books podcast. This week, I'm joined by Washington, D.C. based author Michael Shean. Michael began having vivid nightmares around the age of 16, nightmares that continue to this day. Most people might wake up and try to put those terrifying images behind them as quickly as possible, but Michael is not most people. Instead, Michael does what any author in that situation might do. Take notes and turn it into a career of enthralling storytelling. In this week's episode, Michael and I talk about how he's turned a history of nightmares into a positive, his impassioned thoughts about equality for sci-fi writers, and a deep dive into the world of his flagship series, The Wonderland Cycle. All this and more in episode 8 of the Hulegaard Books podcast. Michael Shean, welcome.
Hey!
Welcome to the Hulegaard Books podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show. I'm glad I got a chance to chat with you. I tell you, I've been enjoying this series of Edge of Oblivion author podcasts, and I'm glad I got a chance to have you on here as well.
I really enjoyed the whole thing. You know, Tony's a great guy, and I was ready to jump on it as soon as he let me know that this was a thing and that he wanted me to put something in. It turns out I had something right there and ready. So.
Now, have you known Tony for a long time, or is this kind of new? Okay.
No. I'm actually not really all super close to him, like say Vitka or anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I've talked to him I talked to him on occasion, and every time I have, he's always been a really great guy. And this, of course, is important, so I wanted to jump right in on it.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into that, because you have a short story in the anthology called The Last American Mortal.
Mm-hmm.
What's that all about?
The Last American Mortal is a story about a man who is living in what used to be Los Angeles and is now called the Red City. The Red City is one of many city-states, both in Mexico and the west coast of the United States, that were taken over by my version of vampires, being mutants, not the undead. And it's a near-future story, but the technology that these beings have, and being as old as they are, is incredibly advanced, and so they're able to establish a foothold with impunity. Long story short, something happens and their advance is cut short. The heart of their movement is torn out, and they settle in these geographical areas, build their city-states, and the protagonist, William Bandy, is actually one of the few prisoners left alive that have been taken since the war that had forged their kingdom, essentially. And that's been 20 or 30 years previous. And so it's about him being called to 3 Triumph Square, which is the central plaza of the city, and where he expects to be sacrificed in a weird proto-biblical ritual in which his blood will be shared amongst all the others as a way of saying, we have finally had victory over humanity, for lack of a better term. So it's all about him being inexorably drawn toward this place. He has a slug in his brain, a behavioral module that doesn't allow him to deviate from the summons, but he can take his sweet time. And as he's going, he's imagining, what the city used to be like, and he's looking around and seeing all of these youthful faces, because the human population, is kind of age-locked right at young adulthood. He's just making his way and thinking about what has brought him to this place. And then, of course, there's a suitable ending, which I won't give away.
Well, that seems pretty complex, man. Is that like a chunk of a bigger idea, or like another story you've been working on, or is that kind of standalone?
Nothing that I'm working on now, but I had always decided to write a collection of short stories, at the very least, called Tales from the Red City.
Mm-hmm.
There were stories about the Red City, the nobles, the nobility, anyway, is what they called themselves. And these are all vampires who, in the ancient days, styled themselves as gods. They're all from a tribe of mutants out in the middle of Turkey, in very, very ancient humanity. And so the idea is that they went underground, and as gods disappeared, and as the Abrahamic faith took over, and with the centuries passing, they've decided a faction of them have decided, you know what, fuck this, we're gonna We're taking over. These people are beasts, for lack of a better term, and they exist to serve us. So fuck it. And they have much better weapons. So then we have much better weapons than the meat do. So we'll just take over and establish ourselves. And that's kind of the whole thing. And I wanted to write a group of not necessarily connected stories, but talked about life in the Red City, life outside the Red City. But anyway, the complex relations between these Nyan demigods and the rest of humanity, who really can't do anything about the fact that these things are around. And they have to deal with them and, for lack of a better word, kind of serve the beast, so to speak, or at the very least keep the wolves happy so they don't go any farther.
Well, that sounds like a tremendous amount of world building, which kind of ties into a topic that I wanted to talk to you about, because
sure,
I have a lot of friends and colleagues also within the publishing community, and a topic that comes up a lot is when you have an idea, how do you know that it's fit for a novel, and how do you know when you've got an idea that's better for a short story? How do you make that distinction when an idea comes to your mind? Like, do you tend?
I don't. No, okay. I'm terrible at short stories. I've written maybe a handful, and it's because I'm terrible at writing short stories. I'll start writing a short story, and then before I know it, it's a novel or it's a world. I mean, the world building happens first in my head. I tend not to invent things on the fly later because it's all canon by the time I start writing something. You take my Wonderland novels. I dreamt most of that. I already knew what was going on. I knew I had like 100 years of history or alternative history, at some point as we're in the early part of the 21st century. It was already there. It was just there I just had to write it down. And that tends to happen is I'll have a flash of inspiration and then the entire world appears in my brain, which is, a pain in the ass.
That sounds like a pretty good problem to have, though, as somebody who wants to tell stories.
yeah, but it's a pain in the ass because I've got all these stories that need to be written,
Well, no, I think, as a writer, we can all understand that idea box scenario, right? Like the box, the imaginary box of overflowing ideas that we'll never get to before death. So I need to figure out who will continue them.
Right now I have 10 novels laid out that I could write.
Wow.
If I had the time, which... I have a day job that keeps me busy 12 hours a day. I don't have the time at the moment, but eventually, hopefully I will. I have 10, 12 novels that can be written. And then you have all the different ideas after that. I mean, as I said, with the Wonderland books, it was originally going to be a trilogy. Then I wrote Bone Wires, which is a side novel, which is going to be a series. And then I'm also going to write a role-playing game based on it. So, there it is.
No shortage of ideas.
No, it's time that I have a problem with.
Yeah, well, I'm with you there. You mentioned something, though, the kind of the maturation of ideas and some of them stemming from dreams. This is a topic that I also have a lot of the time with other authors because, it seems like every writer gets some type of idea from these crazy twisted dreams.
Sure.
And in particular, you mentioned that you've been having kind of this continuing series of nightmares since you were a teenager.
Yeah, I don't dream well. I dream horrible things.
I was wondering, I don't want to dive too much into your personal psyche, but some people will tend to want to avoid, kind of reliving these horrible dreams that they have. You seem to have turned it into, or you'll put a spigot in it, right? For creative browse.
Well, I mean, number one, I'm not crazy. I've been tested. Because, when I was a kid, that was something I was worried about is, my fragmenting, something happening. Because I grew up a really, a smart kind of sensitive kid, and this is how other people have described me anyway, in rural West Virginia in the 80s, which means, I got my ass beaten down a lot. There's a lot of bad things happened to me growing up. My parents were fine. My extended family, it was pretty interesting. But, kids used to pick on me and all that. And you know how kids are. And if you get it all the time, it's really bad. So, when in high school and I started having these dreams, I was really worried that maybe I was fragmenting. But it turns out, no. Whatever's going on in there, it's benign. Traumatic, but benign. So, they say, of course, the science says that dreams are most likely a system of emotional processing while you're asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense to a large degree. Because there are times that I have nightmares that are very obviously weighted by what I'm dealing with at the moment.
Sure.
The dreams where the stories come, they're always so very profoundly realized that I often wonder sometimes if dreams aren't also connections to other realities and that sort of thing. I mean, that with science being what it is these days, that's not nearly as outlandish an idea as it maybe once was.
Mm-hmm.
They are just so vivid and very disturbing, obviously, in many ways. But they do feel very realistic. And the fact that I can recall them very easily after the fact has always been, both a benefit and also an item of concern.
Well,
I don't mean to sound like it's a bit harrowing. I don't sleep very well at night.
Yeah. No, I can relate. I mean, probably not to the same extent. I think that I have, dreams that sometimes make me wonder, like, what the hell combination of food I ate, to produce such a bizarre dream. But
what am I really thinking? Oh, dear God,
But, like, sometimes I'll wake up from these, just these really bizarre, complex dreams. And the first thing I do is start jotting down ideas. And I think there's something there, like something I can mine from that. And my trilogy, Noble, was actually based on a really messed up dream I had, like somewhere around 2009. And I just kept adding to it. And then I start worrying, where I'm like, I start with one messed up dream and then just keep piling a bunch of other messed up stuff on top of it. So
just be weird and be proud of it. That's all I say. I have given up trying to figure it out. I mean, if it's going to make me money someday, then whatever.
So, I mean, what kind of like idea creation rate are we talking about here? Like, do your dreams kind of influence multiple different ideas a year, or is it just like maybe you get like one
every night something new, brother?
Really? Wow.
Every night. Unless I don't dream at all, which does happen sometimes. I mean, I don't have, there are times when I know I've dreamed something, but I don't remember it. But almost every night, I got something.
If only there were a way to turn that into a career somehow.
Christ. Yeah. If I had some way to rotate, I'm waiting for brain taping to pick up the technology, which it very well may.
Yeah, who knows, right?
Being able to translate subconscious thoughts or whatever onto magnetic media or whatever, or storage media. I mean, we're getting to that point. So I'm very interested in having that direct main line. So I just sit down and watch things and I'm like, what the hell is wrong with me? Well, there's another million,
You could put out the DVD.
There you
go. I always thought I'd make it.
Do you want to experience bizarre shit? Sure, we all do.
The infomercial writes itself.
There you go. It does. But I'm Michael Shean, and I have bizarre-ass dreams. And you can, too.
Well, not the most natural segue I've ever had set up, but I
buckle up for safety, son. We're ain't natural here.
but I would love to talk to you about Geek Girl Con. Because you were involved in this just past, was it October last year?
It was in October, yeah.
Yeah.
My first con appearance. And I managed to get a panel. I was very happy.
Now, do you moderate the panel or were you on the panel?
I moderated it.
Okay. But tell us about that. That sounds pretty awesome.
It was called A Universe of Equals, the past, present, and future of gender equality in science fiction and fantasy. Mm-hmm. When we began, I didn't even really bother with the past and present. I said, we know it's terrible. It's getting better, but it ain't there yet. So the question is, how can we improve? And this was going to, but this is yet to crystallize. There's been a lot of bumps trying to get it together. It's supposed to be a project that rode on the coattails of what I wanted to call the Universe of Equals project, which would be a project that would increase, or at least help increase awareness about gender disparity in terms of authors, and especially now in science fiction and fantasy. I mean, just you think about the last couple of weeks, there's been a real problem with emails, or rather board posts that have been put out among members of the science fiction writers, the SFWA. Mm-hmm. And they're fairly influential and landmark gentlemen, and they're always gentlemen, of science fiction. They're basically complaining about women and minorities and coming in and, trying to hijack science fiction for their own purposes. I feel like these people have forgotten what science fiction is about.
Mm-hmm.
What good science fiction is about. I mean, there's juvenile science fiction, which is, yay, we're going to the moon, hooray, and things eat us, whatever. And on the surface, that's it. Really good science fiction is supposed to push issues. It's supposed to talk about agendas. And yeah, I mean, if people are coming in and they're using their art to push their agenda, you got to respect that. You can't say, golly. I feel like these guys have decided that they've all decided to go back in time and meet Jules Verne somehow. I say, yes, women and their breasts and their menstruation. The bears can smell the menstruation, don't they know? You know what I mean? It's so backward. And I say, gentlemen, you have the opportunity to step back and say, this is the future, and I want it to be a good one. That's what it's supposed to be about, right? Mm-hmm. That's what science fiction is supposed to be about, right? Talking about the future and making a better future for everyone through the virtue of the art. Now you've got me preaching. I feel like people need to just get over that. All the established authors that are having a problem with this need to step back and realize that the future, it does not just belong to men, or very often white men. Mm-hmm. The future, we're past that. It's done. It's gone. It's time to recognize we won't have a future without everyone else. Mm-hmm. It's a human future, and therefore all of humanity needs to be given space on the fucking bus. Gotta accept that, or you need to just step aside and decide you're going to sit in your rocking chair and be happy and yell at people that are on your lawn, which is what essentially this effect, this is basically is an effect. Mm-hmm. Get off my lawn, kids. And it saddens me. A year ago, if you asked me this, I'd be much more diplomatic, but I'm really not anymore. Mm-hmm. I am ashamed of these people. I am ashamed that some authors that I really held in regard as a person, growing up, I want to be just like this person. I just want to be just like this person. And I'm not naming names for obvious reasons.
Sure.
Most just because I'm very tired and can't think of a lot of them. But I mean, the Orson, there's the obvious, the Orson Scott Cards of the world.
Right. Right.
I look at it and I say, how did you forget what your job is supposed to be? And that's how I feel. I think it's a job. I think that more than just writing and trying to make money, you are here to try and affect positive social change. And if you can't do that, then go do something else. Mm-hmm. Write for Hollywood.
No, it's very true, because when I'm plotting out my books, I take inclusion very seriously. And, as part of my process of putting out a book, I go through extensive beta testing or beta reading, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And, I want to make sure that everything feels authentic and that it's not authentic through the eyes of a white male.
Yeah.
So I'm totally with you. And I think it's awesome that you were able to get a panel going. And I mean, how did it go? I mean, was it well received?
Well, it's recorded. It's on YouTube. I'll share the address with you later.
Oh, sweet.
But I recorded. It was an hour. It was very well attended. I mean, it was almost an entirely full house. We got a lot of, we ran into some delays starting out, so we didn't have quite as much time for Q&A as I would wanted. But we had a lot of good questions, and I was really thrilled for it. I'd like to do it again this year if I can. I've already discussed things with event staff, but I mean, obviously they're not taking people yet, so
sure.
See how it goes. But I'd love to be back. I considered it absolutely vital.
It's good to have outlets where conversation is progressing things, and I'm just glad to see that there are more and more opportunities becoming available.
There is an absolutely wonderful community out there of brilliant writers, both women and people of color, and both, obviously, mm-hmm. and they're being ignored, and it is a fucking tragedy. Mm-hmm. And I am just thrilled to see that, even though time does change things. Well, death is what it is. Death is the great leveler. But, we have people dying off and people taking their place that are more socially, socially minded or socially progressive.
Mm-hmm.
But I like that despite the existing culture, technology is allowing for these voices to be heard. Mostly social media,
mm-hmm.
And I really, I love that people are being able to be heard despite what's happening, or despite attempts to keep them quiet, or despite attempts to kind of pass them off as hysterical or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And all I have to say is, guys, you're going to write science fiction and you're going to ignore the future and you're going to ignore technology. Karma's a bitch.
Indeed. Well,
so I'm a bit grumpy about this whole thing. You have to excuse me.
No. That's quite all right. I mean, absolutely a topic worth being grumpy about, I would say. Mm-hmm. So while we're talking about science fiction, when I was first introduced to you, it was through the Wonderland Cycle series.
Oh, have you read any of my books?
No, this is something that has just been given to me in the past couple weeks. I would love to talk about your series. You've got
Sure.
Shadow of a Dead Star and Red Eye, right? Is those the first two books?
Shadow of a Dead Star and Red Eye are books 1 and 2 of the Wonderland Cycle, and then of course Bone Wires is set in the same universe, but it takes place a few years before the trilogy, and is entirely separate.
Okay.
It's much more of a ground level, traditional future noir or cyberpunk series. I don't consider any of these books cyberpunk, because to me, cyberpunk is a very specific definition. It has very specific connotations, being, mostly criminal, the same type of universe, but mostly criminal, or having to do with a very specific cultural subset. So I look at Neuromancer and books that early on defined the genre. The punk aspect is not always there in my work, so I'd rather just call it future noir and let other people call it what they want.
Now, you said this is an ongoing series, and you're getting ready to wrap this up. Is that right? This is going to be a trilogy?
Well, I'm wrapping up the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying. I'm trying to finish this book, and the working title is Into Night, but it may change. Mm-hmm. That's all depending on what the publisher thinks and that sort of thing. But no, Bone Wires is going to be a series. Mm-hmm. With the protagonist Dan Gray having the first book is about murder and the dynamics of a privatized corporate police in charge of Seattle. Basically, every major city has contracts. There is no such thing as civil police anymore. Mm-hmm. So, at least in the United States, the police departments are all subsidiaries, or at least branches of one of many corporations that are specifically keyed to public security. Bone Wires is all about that, and about for example, he only has a certain amount of budget hours. He has a budget to clear the crimes that the protagonist Dan Gray gets involved in. If he can't solve it by then it just goes away because nobody wants to pay for it after that. Mm-hmm. And he's a homicide detective, but while that is extremely glamorous nowadays, in the future, or at least in his future, it's more or less just it's the bottom of the barrel, because it's just about cleaning up a loss of revenue. Mm-hmm. Because everyone is a contract. And everyone means money. And if somebody dies, then that's lost money. Yeah. Again, very cynical. My universe is a combination. It's an extrapolation of modern culture into the future, but seen through the lens of the naked consumerism of the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So just writ large.
No, it's an interesting perspective, and one of the things that I really wanted to bring up for conversation is discussing a trilogy, right? Because sure. When you were writing a trilogy, you kind of have like an overarching storyline,
right?
But it's tough to figure out how to bring it all together, right? And I think that because I'm in a similar situation where I'm concluding a trilogy this year as well,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that I've really been struggling with is trying to determine whether or not with the third book, right? Because you're going Return of the Jedi at this point.
Right.
So with the third book,
Yeah, no pressure, right?
yeah, right, not at all. Like, is it more imperative to make it standalone worthy, or is it okay to, kind of make it rife with references to the existing lore and canon? So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that even though it's 3 books, it's really one story.
Yeah.
So for me, at least this time around, I think it has to reference. Red Eye you could read on its own, and you could still get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it loses a great deal if you haven't read Shadow, for example.
Yeah.
I'm told it doesn't suffer from middle book syndrome, so I'm thrilled with that. That it doesn't drag, but it's seen from another character's point of view, so I think it's kind of cheating.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make it an organic entity. You have to assume that it's one long story that's split up into 3 volumes or 3 books, as it were. And I think that if you don't refer to things, and there aren't callbacks, I really think that it stagnates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at William Gibson's Sprawl trilogy, and I'm talking about Cyberpunk, but here it is. His books were all standalone, but they still had a great deal of callback. You had a lot of characters that dovetailed. He managed to do something that I don't know that I could do, and that he did have those standalone books, but everything called back, and I think that you have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise everything's in a vacuum, and you might as well have just written 3 completely different stories.
Right. I was thinking about that just because of striking a balance, because, like you're saying, with the first 2 books of my trilogy, they could stand alone on their own. And with the second book, you definitely would get more if you had read the first book, but I had people that didn't, that still said they enjoyed it. But when I was shaping the third book, it really didn't make sense to me to make it so separate. Like, I really wanted a connection to the first 2 books and tie it all together. Because
you're rolling. Yeah, you have to. You're rolling it together. I feel that you're correct. You have to do that. Again, what's the point of writing the first 2 books if you don't have something to kind of cap it together?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think as a reader, or even just any form of entertainment that's based in a series, like I love little nods to the reader or to the viewer, that basically say, hey, you've been here for the whole ride, so here's a couple little things for you. And
right,
I know some people kind of feel like maybe it feels too clicky or too many in jokes or whatnot, but I love that, right? It's the payoff for taking the journey along with the creator.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there are things that, like, at least in the Wonderland cycle, people would mention, they would ask me things, and that I never really thought to expand upon.
Mm-hmm.
It was in my head, but I wasn't thinking about expanding on it. And people would ask, well, what is X and what is Y? And there's a drug that's mentioned in the first book called the White Rocket. And what is that? You find out eventually.
Yeah.
Or what is a given technology, or what happens to a given character, background character. Yeah, you find out. And because people are asking. I would not have thought to put it in there myself, but if people want that, then I think you have to listen to your readers. I think in the future, in the world that we're in now, where everything is so participatory, I think you owe it to the people that are spending the money to read your work to kind of include that somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are authors that kind of say, this is my book, and, if you don't like it, you don't have to, and you don't have to buy it, herf derf. And I understand that. This may come from my background as an actor when I was younger. But I kind of feel like you're there with your audience. They're there with you. It's not just you writing to faceless people. Especially now when I know a great deal of my audience. They reach out to me on a fairly regular basis. I remember their names.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember their names, then they become people to me. And they're people I don't want to disappoint. And they're also people who deserve, in my opinion, when I can, to get their own little personal piece. And I really think it's necessary.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I like that you say that because, something that has changed for me is I've gotten much more aggressive in the beta reading phase of publishing a book. And it's a step that I didn't take for the first half of my career that I wish I had. But, we grow and mature.
Yes.
And one thing I found is that beta readers are so good at catching the things that I don't think about. And you kind of mentioned that earlier, right? Like about references to a drug that hasn't come up yet, or what happens with a character you're not thinking about. And on the book I'm working on right now, it's like I was getting this feedback from beta readers about a particular character, and they would leave me little notes in the document saying like, "Oh, I can't wait to see where this character goes from here. Like I really feel like a spinoff is coming." And I'm like, "Holy shit, I was going to kill that character like 2 chapters from now." So, yeah, exactly, right? So, on the fly, it's like, well, shit, there's got to be a better way to do this now if the reader cares that much about this character that I thought, there and gone. So now,
I agree with you.
Yeah, that character is going to live on and spin off into something else. So I'm actually curious about this. When you're writing a trilogy and you create so many characters and you really get to know these characters in a very personal way.
My whole second book is a perfect example of this.
Mm-hmm.
The protagonist, Bobby January, was a major character in Shadow. She was not the protagonist, but she was the major secondary character. I had originally intended to frame Red Eye from the point of view of an investigative reporter, completely separate, and who would eventually get drawn in. And I had so many people who absolutely loved Bobby. And not to give anything away for you, but I mean, the end of the first book doesn't exactly leave a lot of room to just pick right up with the protagonist.
Sure.
There's a bit of a cliffhanger there. And I thought that for a long time, when I was planning the book, I was finishing up Bone Wires, and people kept sending me emails going, "I love this character. We think she's great. What are you gonna do with her?" I was gonna make her a background character, at least to a point. A very important character, but still kind of secondary. And I just decided, fuck it, I'm gonna make her the lead. And that has done everything for me. Because of that, I had to really face a lot of fears that I had about writing women as protagonists, mostly because I never wanted to fuck it up.
Right.
I did not want to be disrespectful. But and then I also realized that what I was actually doing is I was being so afraid of writing women that I was completely missing the fact that women are just people, and you should just write them as people, and there's no magical formula to create a female character. Right. And then I was being a complete fucking moron. And it also led to me being much more interested in women in science fiction and, how they're represented. Basically, the whole thing I'm doing now, the whole track, was because people liked that character so much and that they wanted her to be the protagonist of the second book. And I said yes.
Wow, that's really cool. Really cool.
So there you go.
There's reader feedback at its finest.
Yes. I really think that authors should listen, because you never know where that's going to take you. It could define your entire immediate career.
That's very, very true. So when your trilogy is all said and done, are you going to have a hard time saying goodbye to these characters?
No. I mean, they're not going away out of my head anytime soon. I know what happens to them. I've lived with them for the last 5 years or so, because in the original dreams that started this came up long before I ever got published, and I don't necessarily have to say goodbye to them. I mean, I'm not writing things. This last book is not being written in such a way that they vanish off the face of the earth. And there's 4 years between the second book and the third book of really juicy action that I could work on if I wanted to. And ultimately, I feel that even if I do end up, quote unquote, saying goodbye, they'll never be gone for me. And I really hope that people pick them up and go forward with it, in the form of fan fiction or whatever. I don't have many fans that are interested in that, or maybe they wonder if I do, they wonder if I would be okay with it. But I'm going to be writing a role-playing game which basically says, yes, take what you will of my universe and make happy fun with it. So I think that I think it's great, and I really hope that people take that universe and do something with it, even beyond Bone Wires and its sequel, Incognita, and everything else. I hope people take this and go with it, because I'm not always going to be writing Wonderland books, but it's always going to be special.
Mm-hmm.
Live on in the minds of other people. I'd be fucking thrilled.
No, I mean, what a flattering way to, have your characters live on outside your head,
It is. I don't understand why people don't, why authors have such a problem with fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're gonna say, oh, it's embarrassing, or they do sexual things. So what? It doesn't matter. They're no longer yours. The moment you put these characters on paper and circulate them among a greater body than yourself, they're no longer just yours.
Mm-hmm.
You have your canon, and it's the official canon, as they say.
Sure.
But everybody else has a right to make these characters their own. And if you don't want that, don't write. Don't write, because you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. And what's the point of that? I think it's wonderful. I do. I'm not huge into a lot of fan fiction, and it's never been a thing for me, but I see how much joy it brings other people.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's ridiculous to try and keep people from that.
Mm-hmm.
I may actually start asking people if they want to do it. If they will, then I'll reward them for it, because I think it's great.
You know what I really like about it is that it inspires people to create who maybe don't have the confidence to do so. And,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about, to show how ignorant I am, I didn't know anything about shipping until the last couple of years. And when I found out that there's this huge community of kind of, armchair writers that are coming up with these like more romantic versions of exploring these characters that they know and love, I mean, it fascinated me. Like, it's not something I would be into as a writer, but I love that it's a culture that is inspiring people to create. Like, I love that.
See, also my point.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, these people are doing things that, that you would never consider, because you're a different type of person, you're a different writer, and the characters don't just belong to you.
Right.
I think it's great. I mean, people try to ship my characters together. I've got people who send me email. They're like, so, these two are getting together, right? Right? No, you're going to be terribly disappointed, but you know what? I would love it if you would write an alternative canon to it. I think it's great. I really do. I really do. And I just think that every writer should really kind of push that and say, yes, do it. Let me know. I'll go and read it. I'll tell you what I think if I have time. Because you're fostering new fuel for creative minds. And what is bad about that? Right. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I think it's the greatest service that you can do for people as a writer. I mean, never mind what you're writing and entertain them, but if you can get them to write their own stuff, holy shit. That's my job. That's the job I want.
Right. No kidding, right?
Yeah.
You have a lot of irons in the fire for 2014 and beyond. What does the roadmap look like for you this year?
Not so many as you would think. I'm trying to take things one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Once we finish up with Into Night, or whatever it's going to end up being titled, then I could go right in and start writing the next Dan Gray novel. But I also have some other things. I'm interested in writing what the Japanese call light novels, which are a serialized novellas that have illustrated panels.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'd like to do a more adult version of that with alternative characters and things like that. Like one of the stories I have in mind is called The Flame of Rion, which is about it essentially starts out as a self-rescuing princess scenario, which becomes a female-helmed fantasy epic.
Mm.
I have some other things as well. I mean, I really don't know what I'm going to do quite yet after I finish this book, because this book has been such a ridiculous challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it is the end of the trilogy, I don't want to disappoint anybody, And there's lots of stuff going on in my non-writer life. It's leaching a lot of creative energy from me, and I'm just trying to make. I want to make deadlines. There are all kinds of things going on. So I'll get back to me in a couple months, and I'll have a much clearer idea of what I'm doing.
Well, that sounds like a date, my friend. I'd be happy to do so.
Sure, I'll be glad to come on anytime you want.
Well, the Edge of Oblivion anthology came out back on February 3rd. Michael Shean is included with his short story, The Last American Mortal. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the Hulegaard Books podcast.
Thank you very much. And folks, pick this thing up. Way more talented people than me are in it, and it's for a really, really important cause.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.